Reformed Church.
Ms. Lindsay was leading us in worship. I thought about like out of the shadows. Like, there is something that the Lord has been trying to teach people, ever since the Lord began to show people types and shadows of Christ. With showing people shadows of himself, it's a matter of getting people to see the shadow and then to let go of it, right? Because it is so easy sometimes for people to see a shadow of Christ, to see the significance of it, and then to get so stuck in it that then they can't let it go, right? That they keep it and they keep practicing the shadow, right? And there are so many different shadows of Jesus, right? And of what he's done. There's circumcision, there is tithing, there is fasting. There are so many different types and shadows, right? There's water baptism, right? There are so many things that are just types and shadows of Jesus, things that are intended to point us to him, right? The 10 Commandments, right, there are things that were intended to point us to Jesus. And, even though that's not necessarily really, I don't think really in and of itself a shadow, but it was something that the law was something that the Lord gave in order for us to see our inability and our need for Jesus. But nonetheless, anytime the Lord has, in the past used something to draw people to Jesus, like that works, and it has worked, right, for a long time. But the thing is, people, though, have a tough time letting go of it. So God's desire is to correct people's thinking, just to draw their attention to the one that they can behold, to draw their attention to Jesus whom you can see. Where before you couldn't see, so you had a type and a shadow, right? But now you can see. Here he is, right? But getting people away, sometimes from, from the shadow, it's just a tough thing sometimes. I heard a story, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but I'll say it anyway. And if not, I think maybe I'm making up a version of the story, but that works anyway. But a little boy sticks his hand in a vase, right? And I know this is not how it goes, but it'll work for the point. Sticks his hand in a vase, and a vase has a very small opening, right, on the top, and then it opens bigger to the bottom. Well, he sticks his hand in there and grabs a penny, right? But he grabs a penny, but he's making a fist to grab the penny, and he can't get his hand out, right? He can't really get it out. So sometimes what it is we're coming into the kingdom the right way, right, through faith in Jesus. And the Lord could have definitely used a shadow or a type to get us to recognize or to see something, and then for us to really then go the next step and really behold the reality of who Christ is, right? But sometimes, we have a problem of letting go of something that in and of itself doesn't really have any worth, right? Like, I mean, what really is a penny worth these days, right? It's not worth a lot. Even to a little child, he may think, oh, it's money, but it's not worth anything, right? And sometimes, when you have a shadow and then you see the reality of Christ, the shadow in and of itself has lost its worth. The reality of Christ is here. He's already on the inside of us, right? He's already brought his spirit upon the earth. So even people who are unbelievers, right? The presence of God, right, is here on the earth, right? He's not some presence that's only in heaven and has kind of abandoned us here to our own devices, right? But he's actually rectified the problems that there are in the world and has come in order to be able to be with us, right? But people have a tough time sometimes just letting go of things, Pastor Mike and I were talking the other day, and it is so true. I remember a day where I used to defend Christmas. Like Christmas to me Christmas time was a very sacred time to me, right? But really, growing and continuing to grow in the knowledge of Christ, you really recognize, right, that if you acknowledge the suffering of Christ every single day that you live, right? You're acknowledging Jesus. You're endeavoring always to grow in the knowledge of what Christ has done for you. What does December 25th, which in and of itself as a day has there's no real significance to it. Even historically, there's no real significance to it, right? December 25th has absolutely nothing to do with Jesus, right? It was just a thing that, however it came about, People well-intending, right, come up with a day, however it developed, whatever the history of it is. I actually don't really care historically about it. It's just, it's just a day that people set aside. But the thing is, I don't set aside a day. I set aside every single day of my life to understand and to grow in the knowledge of Jesus. It's not like something that I do on December 25th. But when things that can be, right, there's nothing. I'll say it to you this way too. As much as I don't have, this adoration for the day as far as my relationship with the Lord goes, right? There's also actually nothing wrong with you doing anything on that day that exalts the Lord. But for that matter, there's nothing wrong with you doing something that exalts the Lord on December 23rd either, right? It's just the fact that you are doing something to exalt Jesus. It's not that there's anything wrong with it, you doing it that day or any other day, right? It's just a day, right? It's like your birthday. It's just a day, right? Oh, so-and-so forgot your birthday. If they haven't talked to you all year long and they happen to have forgotten your birthday, does it really matter? They haven't talked to you all the other days either, right? Do you want somebody to talk to you on your birthday and acknowledge, your birthday and your friendship on your birthday? Or do you want them to acknowledge the love that they have for you all the time, right? It's like there's little shadows. We get stuck in shadows of stuff. People that get stuck in circumcision, right? Oh, you can believe in Jesus, but you also must be circumcised, right? You're getting stuck in a shadow. Why do I have to get circumcised and cut the foreskin of my flesh off to prove something when I'm already saved and already have Jesus living on the inside of me, right? Water baptism. Do I really have to be water baptized? You can never be water baptized ever, and you're still saved. Right? If you want to get water baptized because you want to acknowledge with an outward work, right, the significance of what Jesus is to you, and that just like, you've gone into that water and you come out of it, right? That's what the Lord has done when he baptized you with the Spirit of God, right? Fine. There's nothing wrong. Is there something wrong with water baptism? Of course there isn't. There's something wrong with it when we can't let it go for the reality that's staring you right in the face, right? In other words, we have to be people as Christians that can see a shadow for exactly what it is. It's a shadow that had a significance, right? And there's nothing wrong with it, right? But I have Jesus. Like you have to be able to acknowledge, but I have Jesus. I know the reality of what I have and who I am and who is in me, right? So there's nothing wrong there's nothing wrong with acknowledging Jesus. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging his resurrection for Easter. There's nothing wrong with any of that, right? It's just when we're at a point though where we consider something as sacred as Christ is, that's the problem, because there is nothing that compares to the sacredness of who Jesus is, right? He is who he is apart from all that stuff, right? Nothing makes, in other words, Easter, Christmas, circumcision, tithing, baptism, nothing of that makes you who you are or makes him who he is, right? He is who he is apart from all that, and you are who you are apart from all of that. So there's never a time that you have to ever feel, and listen, because this is really where the Lord always endeavors us. It's one of the places, right, or the main place where the Lord endeavors to correct our minds, is just so that our seeking can be right. Right? So that your seeking is always defined as you wanting to come to know Jesus. That's it. Your seeking is not, I read my Bible and I prayed for 15 minutes, therefore the Lord will acknowledge that I've done something good, and in my doing something good, I will receive, right? You're seeking the Lord is you seeking, in other words, there is a right way to seek the Lord, and then the end result of seeking the Lord in that way is that you find, right? And there is a seeking of the Lord that has a good intention behind it, but finds nothing, right? And the Lord knows that the Lord knows when people are seeking him, right? I mean, for years I was seeking the Lord. I was seeking the Lord the wrong way though, and I could not find him, right? We were, involved in things that were not Christian things, but we thought we were doing something right. We thought we were seeking the Lord, but we were in the wrong place doing the wrong stuff, right? So therefore, we didn't find what we were seeking. But then we heard the gospel, right? And then we were still seeking the Lord with the same zeal, right? But hearing the gospel, then, now my seeking ended in finding him, right? And it is really true that the people that seek the Lord we'll find them if we continue to seek him, right? But it is through correcting our hearts that we find him, right? Because there are ways that men have of seeking God that are wrong. There are people, and we've said it before, there are people that actually physically hang themselves on crosses, right? They tie themselves, they don't pierce themselves, right? But they hang from crosses just in an effort to try to recognize, right? Or to do a work in a way, right? There are people that stop doing things. There are people that believe that if you fast, in other words, that if you stop eating for a time, that somehow brings you closer to God. But just listen to this. How could you not eating food bring you closer to a God that has actually reconciled you to himself through the death of his son? How could you not eating food help that? Like, is there anything that, God reconciled us to himself through Jesus Christ. Could I do anything that would enable that better than God's enablement, right? He's already enabled it through the death of his son. All he's asking us to do is to see the significance of Christ and him crucified so that we can see the way to the Father. But by not eating could never do anything there, right? The best, listen, in the best scenario, what eating could do is maybe you think so much about food that during the time that you're not eating, right, maybe, I don't know, maybe if you had your mind only on Jesus, but it wasn't the not eating, it was just that you put your mind on Jesus. Chances are, though, that theory probably would not work, because if you're somebody that thinks about food all the time and then you deny your body any food, now it really wants to think about food, right? So it'll probably backfire on you. But the point is, do you see what the thing is? That anything that you ever do where you have a mindfulness on the Lord and what he has done is going to prosper you. But anytime that we try to do something to make that a way, even if you're a Christian, right? And you try to do something that could become a little bit of a way to reach God or to make your voice be heard, right, by the Lord, it's going to backfire on you every time. And the Lord, all that he does, honestly, he doesn't hold something against you. He doesn't, get angry at you. He just goes on to do what the Lord is so good at. And it's just that he continues to bring things across your path to your mind to just correct your thinking. And he just does it all the time. All the time. The Lord is always trying to correct our thinking, always trying to correct our thinking. And whenever you're off in left field somewhere doing something else, he's just going to keep doing what he does, is just to correct our thinking, right? Let me show you something real quick out of Isaiah chapter 58. Isaiah chapter 58. And just really verse number 1. And it's really a cool thing. It just goes so well with this. On last Sunday's message was actually out of Isaiah 58, and I was actually touching on the ending verses of Isaiah 58. It's not a very long chapter. But, I felt for some reason like I kept thinking over and over again, like my mind kept going back to last Sunday's message throughout the week. And then I kept thinking, you know what, maybe I had like a desire. I felt like I wanted to just read Isaiah 58 again. So I just did, and I just kept thinking about it, right? I just put it down, and I just kept thinking about Isaiah 58, like the things, and it felt like there was more, and sure enough, there was more. So verse number 1, keep in mind what's going on, right? The Lord is trying to teach his people, and he uses prophets, right? Especially in that day, prophets to be able to correct people, right? To correct their thinking, to correct what they were doing, to correct the way that they were going, right? And obviously here, in this case, the prophet is Isaiah, right? And the Lord tells Isaiah, cry aloud, spare not, like don't hold anything back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet, right? He said, tell my people their transgression and the house of Jacob their sins. Now, what God is not trying to do, he's not trying to guilt and condemn them. The Lord is saying to Isaiah, tell them in the way that they're going wrong, and you'll see. Because what he's going to say in a second is, they've been trying to seek me, but they are delighting and taking pleasure in the wrong thing. So I need you, Isaiah, to talk to them, to show them where they need to be corrected so that they can see. So that in their zeal to want to know me, right, their seeking will lead them to find me instead of them going the way that they're going, which they will seek, but they will not find, right? At least not the way that they were doing it. So he tells them, tell them their sin. In other words, tell them what the problem is. Right? Whenever we're doing something and you think, oh, this is just not working, it's because there's a problem in what you're doing. And when it has to do with seeking the Lord, right, the problem, like 99.999999% of the time, is that Jesus is not in the mix of your thinking, right? Or the correct portrayal of Jesus is not in the mix of your thoughts, right? So in verse number 2, he says, yet they seek me daily. Like he says, like, these are people that are seeking me daily. He says, yet they seek me daily, and they delight to know my ways, right? As a nation that did righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask of me the ordinances of justice. They take delight in approaching God. So they want to draw near to God. They want to know the Lord's ways. It's something that they do on a daily basis, on a regular basis. They want to see the righteousness of God, right? Like they have the right, they know the right result, right? Like they're seeking. These are not people that aren't seeking God. They are. So what does God want to do? He wants to straighten out their thinking, right? But listen now, this is how you know what the Lord is trying to correct in them. Because listen to what their mentality is. This is what was going through their mind while they were seeking. Verse number 3 says, why have we fasted? They say. Why have we fasted? This is something that they're saying. Why have we done this? Why have we fasted and you have not seen? So there, see, right there, you know there's something wrong. They're not trying to look at what God is trying to show them about the Messiah that is to come. Because remember, God has been trying to teach the people of Israel the gospel from the very beginning. The same gospel, the Lord says, that was taught to us and is being taught to us today is the same gospel that was being taught to them. To them, it was keep your eyes on the one that is to come. Him you're going to listen to. Him you can believe in now. Abraham believed God, believed that, and he was made righteous because of his faith in Jesus who was ahead of him, right? That's what the Lord is trying to do here. Teach them the gospel, right? But you see, their mind is not on the gospel that the Lord is trying to teach them. Their mind is on a work or a shadow that was intended to be just a shadow of Christ who was to come, right? A shadow of a condition, all right? Or a condition, I'll leave it there, that they would be able to live in. Is what fasting was representing, right? Fasting was actually representing the rest that they would have when they received the Spirit of God, right? But they weren't looking at fasting that way. To them, fasting was a work, and they were stuck in a shadow, right? Even though the Lord was trying to show them the significance, the reality of what was to come, right? From that shadow, right? The reality, like where this fasting that I'm teaching you, this is Him who will give you that rest. Get your eyes on Him, not on the fasting, on Him, right? Not on the circumcision, on Him. Not on the circumcision, but the one that will circumcise you, right? Not on the fasting, but the one that will give you rest, right? So he says, why have we fasted and you have not seen? Why have we afflicted our souls and you take no notice, right? In other words, what they're basically telling to God and what they're thinking is, Lord, we're doing this stuff. Why don't you notice what we're doing? In other words, why don't you bless us, right, for the stuff that we're doing, right? But listen, He was the one that told them to do it, right? He was the one that actually told them to afflict their souls. He used that same wording. He told them to fast. He told them to circumcise, right? To be circumcised. He told them to do all these things. He actually used that word, right? Then he said, why have we afflicted our souls and you take no notice? In fact, this is what the Lord says now. In fact, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure. You see? The pleasure, they would do that. They would fast, and they were taking pleasure in the action, in the act. That's where their pleasure was. Instead of them seeing Christ and taking pleasure in what the Lord had done for them, They were taking pleasure, quote unquote, in what they were doing to reach God, right? That's where their pleasure was. So it's not that they weren't seeking God. They wanted to know God. They wanted to know his ways, right? But it's what they were doing. They were stuck in something that God told them to do, but they were missing why he did it. The same way that Jesus fed the multitude, right? In order to teach them that he was the bread of life, that life that they needed could come from him. Right? Not from a bread that anyone who has ever eaten and tried to sustain their life by food alone has ended up dead, right? But he wanted them to see that he is that bread of life. That's why when they came to Jesus the second time, he says, you come to me, he says, because you didn't understand the sign that I was showing you. In other words, they get stuck in just the thing itself, right? And he said, in fact, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure. And you exploit, it says, your laborers. Verse number 4 says, indeed, you fast for strife and debate and to strike with the fist of wickedness. You know, I have some ideas around that, and I'll just present it to you that way. That when he says, you know, exploit all your laborers and you strike with the fist of wickedness, a thought that I've been having regarding that is just, you know, that in what they were doing in their fast, right? You know what? I'll leave it there. I'll leave that. We'll leave that alone. The latter part of verse number 4, it says, you will not fast as you do this day. So he says, so this is not always going to be like that. You're seeking me. He says, but you will not always fast as you do this day to make your voice heard on high. You see the reason that he just gave? He says the reason why he says you won't fast this day like you normally do, just to see if your voice can be heard on high. In other words, he says he revealed to them the reason, right? This is what Isaiah is actually speaking to them. This is what God told Isaiah to tell them, and guaranteed this is what Isaiah told them, right? He said, you're fasting. You have to hear it like he's telling them, right? You're fasting, but he says you won't always fast like this, right? Just so that your words can be heard, right? But there's coming a day, and I'll read that to you, which I touched on last service. There's coming a day, though, where you will not seek God, right, by trying to find your own pleasure, right? You will not seek God by trying to use your own words, right, by your own work. But you will seek me because you will seek me by, right, the hearing of faith. In other words, hearing the gospel, right? You will hear and you will listen and you will believe. Right? And then obviously they would receive. But he says, you will not fast as you do this day to make your voice, it says, to make your voice heard on high. Let me just share with you something real quick. You know, in Isaiah 58 and verse number 1, we had just read, it says, tell them their transgression. In other words, tell them their sin. And you can see like how lovingly that comes across. But look at it real quick. Look at it in John 16, if you can, real quick. John 16, and look at verse number 8. I just want you to see like the heart of God, like because sometimes you read this maybe the way you used to read it, right? I remember the way I used to read the Old Testament. It was like God was always slapping people on top of their head, but really, when you hear the significance of what he was trying really to relate to them, you really see, my gosh, it was just really a loving gospel. Is what he was really trying to explain to them. But in John 16 and in verse number 8, he says, and when Jesus speaking here, he says, and when he has come, he will convict the world of sin. The same way that the Lord said that Isaiah, telling Isaiah, show them their sin. This is what he's saying here, that when the Holy Spirit would come, he would convict the world of sin, of righteousness, and of judgment, which is what he was trying to show them here. But of sin it was because they don't believe in me, right? The sin was, the wrong thing, the sin was, they don't believe in me. What was he correcting in the people of Israel here? They're not looking at me. They're beholding something else, right? They're looking at their own work. They're looking at the fast itself instead of looking at the representation of what that is, right? Like what does fasting represent? Fasting represents the rest that would come by the Holy Spirit. So let me get my eyes there, right? Let me get my eyes on a rest instead of the work and the afflicting of my soul and all the stuff that I'm doing. Lord, why haven't you noticed? Right? Because when people think that way, why haven't you noticed? What they're saying is, I'm not receiving, right? You haven't noticed, and I know that you haven't noticed because I'm not receiving. So you know that they're on the wrong track and they're not on Jesus. Because if their mind were on the Lord, right, in today's church, they would be thinking about what they have already received and what they have in them, instead of thinking that God has something left to do, right? I was thinking about that in a roundabout context here. You know, when people talk about crying out to God today, you know, it's a cool thing that you can really see, you know, Lord, I don't have to cry out and try to figure out if you've heard my cry for help, right? Because the Lord has heard my cry for help before I was ever born, right? And sent his son so that I could be helped, right? So I don't have to cry out to God for help with the image in my mind that God needs to help me, right? But instead, if you ever cry out to God for help, your mind should be thinking, Lord, I should be taking advantage of what you have already given me, right? Not of what you're going to give me, not about what you're going to do, but seeing again, what have you already done, right? You know, Miss Lindsay said it while she was singing, and my mind grabbed a hold of it right away. But the Lord really did say, right? He did say it is finished, right? He did say it is finished. And that's probably, if there's three key words, right, to the life of a believer for all of our lives, right? It should be, it is finished, to understand it, right? It's finished. To the people of Israel, it will be finished. And you can believe in that finished work, in that it is finished. You could believe in it is finished now, and you would receive ahead of the cross, right? How much more us now that receive the inheritance of Jacob, right? That receive the inheritance of those that are of faith, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, receive now today from our inheritance, right? Crying out to God is not a problem as long as you understand that when you're vocalizing your need to God, you can see that need has already been fulfilled in Christ in you. And if that's speaking out loud, right, helps you understand, like, my God, like, because sometimes, honestly, sometimes we cry out like we don't have it, right? That's the reality of the fact that sometimes we cry out like we don't have the answer, like we don't have the abundance of the wealth, right, and the excess of power that we need in order to meet our need. Sometimes just in our desperation, because we're hurting, because our mind is confused, because of pain, because of depression, because of a lot of things, right, we just forget, right? And you know, that happens. That happens, but that's why the Lord has organized us within a church, within a body of believers, so that we can be those people to remind one another when we need to be reminded, right? It's an awesome thing. So in John 16 in verse number 8, he had said, and when he has come, he will convict the world of sin and of righteousness and of judgment. Of sin because they don't believe in me, of righteousness because I go to the Father and you see me no more, and of judgment because the ruler of this world is judged. Like that's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. He all that he's saying is, you need to believe in me because I have gone to the Father. And you know what? I want you to see that a little differently this morning, because it may come up again. Anytime Jesus says, because I go to the Father, like he was returning, all that he was saying is, it is finished, right? Every time he was saying that, I'm going to the Father, all that he was saying is, it is finished. You know why? Because there was no way that he would ever return to his Father unless he had done what the Father told him to do, right? And just like the rain and snow come down upon the earth and do what their intention is to do, and that is to saturate the earth, right? So the Lord accomplished and did everything that the Father told him to do, and he finished it completely, which was to take our death and to take our sin and our sickness and our disease and to bring that suffering upon himself so that we could live, right? Anytime that our eyes get off of that, right, the Lord just wants to correct your heart so you can not get stuck in things that were just intended to lead you to him, right? And instead just get stuck in the thing, right? Unfortunately, that'll lead nowhere, right? If you don't continue and you just get stuck in that. I mean, there are Christians that believe that are saved and love the Lord that can get stuck in shadows and not be able to continually grow in the knowledge in specific areas of their life because they're actually stuck in this, right? There are believers, right, that I believe that are people that are really saved. and they accept negative things happening in their life, well, because they had communion and they forgot to ask God for forgiveness before they had communion, or they had an argument on the way to church, right, with their spouse, and then they had communion. So now they believe that there's some kind of a curse thing on them, or some reason now why it is okay for them to suffer, because you see, you're just stuck in a shadow, right? And out of all shadows, my God, that we would get stuck on the symbol of the wine and the bread. like man, if you were going to get stuck, you would think that would be an easy one to let go, right? To not have to rely on Welch's grape juice and Wonder Bread, right? Instead of seeing Jesus Christ and the fact that he lives right on the inside of you, that we would actually get stuck on wine and bread and think that anything could curse what God has blessed, right? Because it's just getting stuck, again, just getting stuck in a shadow and not seeing the reality in Jesus. And you know what? That doesn't happen to one believer. It happens to every believer. You get stuck in things that you don't have to get stuck in, and the Lord just wants your mind to be, you just snap out of it. Let me show you the reality. And then you're like, oh my gosh, how silly. Like for years, stuck thinking about this stuff. And then look, all the time, it was just you, Lord, wanting to show me Jesus, right? All the time, just you wanting to show me Jesus. Let's go back to Isaiah 58. Isaiah 58, and we were down around verse number 4. Isaiah 58, verse number 4. It says, indeed, you fast for strife and debate, and to strike with the fist of wickedness. You will not fast as you do this day, to make your voice heard on high. So just something that I'll mention. I don't know that we have to go there necessarily right now, but Hebrews 10 and Hebrews 4, both of them are just really good examples, right? Where when you think about having that you need as a believer something external to Jesus, something sacred, something holy, right? In order to be able to give you audience with the Lord, right? Number one, like, my gosh, have we forgotten really that he lives right here, right? Have we forgotten that he lives like right on the inside of you? Like you're not having to knock down the window, the doors of heaven to get God's attention. Like he actually lives on the inside of you. But that aside, right? In Hebrews 10, he talks about us having boldness to enter, right? Boldness to enter into heaven, boldness to be able to take from the things that are heavenly, access to God, that we would have boldness in our access to God because of Jesus, right? And then Hebrews 4 talks about Christ as our high priest, right? The one that is really, he is our representative. He is the one that is our access, and the reason why Christ is our access, right? And that he is the right one that we needed, the right access, right? Because there was no way that we could do this for ourselves. In other words, there would be nothing that we could do as an action that could ever give us entrance into the kingdom, ever give us audience with the Lord. Nothing ever. There could be nothing that we could do apart from the Lord. Like none of those things apart from Jesus, not fasting, not circumcision, not any of that could ever give us audience with the Lord or ever get God's attention. Because again, they were given by him as symbols to have us behold him, right? To have us behold the Lord. And yet, you know, even in with that, and I'm trying to just find something because I just thought about it, but when I just said behold him, but I may be thinking about something a little later. But those symbols were given just for us to bring our attention that he would be the one that would stand out to us, that we would be able to behold him, to see the glory of God, right? Not getting stuck on the physical things themselves. In verse number 5, he says, and here again, remember that it is God that told them to fast, right? This was something that God started, right? And yet he says in 5, like it's almost like think about this for a second, right? Like God tried to, right? Not being facetious, if that's the word, but like really think about it, right? I'm the one that told you this, yes, but think about what I have said, right? Is it a fast that I have chosen, a day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it like what I'm looking for in that? Is it for you to bow down your head like a bulrush and to spread out sackcloth and ashes? Would you call this a fast? Would you call what you're doing, do you call that an acceptable day to the Lord? In other words, do you think that that's what I'm pleased with? Do you think that that's what I find acceptable? Like in other words, that's such a shallow thing. To think that a God who gave his own son would actually be pleased with our fasting and our circumcision, like he just sacrificed his own son, right? He punished his own son. Like, how could we ever look at fasting the same way? How could we ever look at circumcision the same way? How could we ever look at water baptism the same way? How could you ever behold anything the same way when you compare that to Christ and him crucified for you, right? Nothing compares to that. Everything was just intended to show you who he is. That's all. Or is a symbol of him, right? I mean, in Jesus, we were just talking about this, even in communion, he said, as often as you do this in remembrance of me, like of what I did, right? It was the whole thing about Passover, right? There's people stuck on Passover. Passover, my God, the Lamb of God, right? That would give its life so that the people could live, right? I mean, it's just, again, we get stuck in shadows, and the Lord wants to take you so far beyond the shadow. I mean, if you think the shadow's cute, imagine what the reality of it, how awesome that is. If you think there's some element of glory in the shadow, how much greater is he himself, right? Like, behold me is really what the Lord is saying. Like, it's almost like, it's something really cute that my grandson does, just because he's cute in general. But when you're talking, us adults, we have very important things to say and do. So we're talking to somebody, sometimes you're just in a conversation with somebody else, but kids don't care. So he takes you by the chin just very gently, and he goes like this. He turns your head. He says, Pop. He says, like, he wants to talk to you. I want you to look at me. So he just grabs your chin really, really, he doesn't grab it hard, but he just turns your face, right? Like honestly, sometimes I think that's really all the Lord is trying to do. Like, okay, I know. Look, just see, look. Huh? See that? You like that? Yeah, I love that, Lord. Okay, stay here. Just stay right here. You don't got to go anywhere. You got to do nothing. But Lord, but no, right here. Yeah, Lord, but I wanted to fast and I haven't read my Bible yet. Yeah, right here. It's okay, right? You can read your Bible later, but still, like, stay right here, right? Because we get stuck on things, right? Right? Oh, like honestly, it's just stupid stuff. I used to believe like that when something negative happened to me on a day that I had to rush out to work and didn't get a chance to read my Bible, that's why it happened. And I would be okay with it because I'm like understanding this bad thing happened because of that, like cause and effect. You don't read your Bible, bad stuff happens, right? And you put, you kind of shroud it in, because somebody says, you have to seek the Lord, and you have to read the word. And then you shroud the fact that it is right for you to listen to the Lord and for you to hear what the Lord is saying. But we shroud that in, I didn't read my Bible, therefore bad things are happening to me, right? It's not. You could not read your Bible for 3 months, and if bad things happen, it has nothing to do with that, right? You should have your eyes on the Lord. You should be listening to what the Lord is saying, right? But to think that a God that gave his own son would either bring bad on you or even allow something bad to happen to you, regardless, because we have funny ways to say either he did it to me or he's allowing it, right? Well, he's not doing it or allowing it, right? This world could be doing stuff to you, and you could be allowing it, right? But not God, right? God doesn't just allow bad things to happen to you because, he could fix it, but he doesn't, right? He already fixed it so that you don't have to suffer, period. And I know that might seem pie in the sky to people, but he fixed it so you wouldn't have to suffer anymore. That means never again, right? Well, why do people suffer? He made it so that you would not have to suffer ever again. Yes, we do, but he made it so that you wouldn't have to ever again. Anyway, so he tells them in verse number 5, he says, is this what you think I find acceptable? Is this what you think the acceptable day of the Lord is, right? Let me just read to you something, Hebrews chapter 10, the latter part of it anyway, but I'll just read you a little piece of Hebrews 10. In Hebrews 10 and verse number 8, he says, previously saying, he was reading, I think, this is one of the Psalms, but in Hebrews, he's kind of quoting that. And he says, previously saying, sacrifice and offerings, burnt offerings and offerings for sin, you did not desire. It says, nor had pleasure in. In other words, that even though the Lord was the one that instituted these things, right? Burnt offerings and sacrifices, The Lord himself says, though, that he took no pleasure in those things, right? Because they were just, again, just a shadow of the one that was to come, right? So he didn't take his pleasure in that. So in other words, even as the people were doing it, the Lord was not pleased because they were sacrificing to him. The Lord would be pleased if you were sacrificing and understanding what the sacrifice meant, right? Not because you were sacrificing, but because you understood in your mind what that sacrifice meant. That's pleasing to the Lord, that your mind would be on Christ, right? That's pleasing to him, right? But he said, but you were not pleased in sacrifice and offering for sin. You didn't desire those things, nor had pleasure in them, which are offered according to the law. Like, that's just a caveat there, which are actually offered according to the law that God commanded them at that point, right? He says, then he said, behold, speaking of the reality of that shadow, behold, I have come to do your will, O God. He takes away the first. He takes away the first that he may establish the second covenant, right? He takes away the shadow. He takes away the shadow to establish the reality. He takes away the shadow to establish the reality. Verse number 10, by that will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all time. You see what he did? He takes away the shadow, right? He's not saying that it wasn't important for its time to lead people to Jesus, but he takes away the first to establish the second. In other words, he fulfilled it. He didn't throw it away like it was a piece of trash and it's nothing and we should insult it and hate it. He just fulfilled it, right? He fulfilled the law. So because he's fulfilled the law, then that is already fulfilled. Therefore, it's outdated, right? To try to keep it, you would be out of date because it's already been fulfilled, right? So he says, by the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all, right? Thank you, Jesus. Going back to Isaiah 58 real quick, right? We're wrapping up here. He says then in verse number 6, Isaiah 58 and verse number 6, Isaiah 58, 6, says, is this not the fast that I have chosen? And when you think about fasting, again, I know we haven't given you a ton of context around fasting meaning rest, right? But that definitely is, that's definitely the reality of it, right? Maybe we can do that another time, or you can look online in our glossary, and you could also look at online messages. But anyway, Isaiah 58, 6 says, is this not the fast that I have chosen? Now watch what he says. Is this not the rest that I have chosen? Is this not really what I have chosen? He says, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. Verse number 7, is it not to share bread with the hungry, and that you bring to your house the poor who are cast out? When you see the naked, that you cover him, and not hide yourself from your own flesh, right? Here's the interesting thing. You could be saying, well, hold on a second. If you said that fasting is rest, like what is all this stuff that he's saying for you to do for somebody else? How is that now the fast? Isn't that just another work? But really, you know, there are lots of keys in what he's saying there that would kind of show you what he's talking about. He's saying, right, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo heavy burdens. In other words, there was a time even Jesus talking about the Pharisees. He says the thing with the Pharisees is they would come and they would sit in the seat of Moses, right? And they would tell the people, right, what they should do. It says, but they wouldn't keep even the very thing that they were saying. They wouldn't even keep it. And they wouldn't lift a finger to help the heavy burdens that they put upon the people, right? Meaning the law, right? And their own man-made traditions, right? So they would put this upon the people, but yet wouldn't do anything to lessen the heavy burdens that he put upon them. In other words, they wouldn't enter into the kingdom, and they wouldn't allow them to enter into either because of these heavy burdens. So what this was all about, what he was saying there is to take those that are burdened, right, and to bring them out of that. To those that are brokenhearted, to bring them out of that. In other words, what you'll see, the rest that we have, right, the fast that we have, the rest is given to us, we know today, right, from everything that we've learned over the years, right? We know that we have rest by the Spirit of God. In other words, we are able to live a life at rest knowing that it is finished, and allowing it to be, right, that we are saved, right, by the finished work of Jesus Christ, and that we have the Spirit of God on the inside of us that is active to work, right, and we have a rest. So there's a rest there, almost like a double application to that rest, right? Well, all that he's saying here, he's saying all of these things to do, to share your bread with the hungry, to bring into your house the poor who are cast out, right? What he's saying is, right, he's talking about really offering Christ to people for salvation. And really, if you compare that, all of these examples that he's given, look at Isaiah real quick. Look at Isaiah 61 and look at verse number 1, right? And we'll actually look at it together up here. Isaiah 61, verse 1. It starts off, look at what it starts off. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me. This is talking about Jesus, right? The Spirit of God is upon me because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings to the poor, which he was talking about. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captive, the opening of prison to those that are bound, right? Those are all very, very like examples to what he's saying in Isaiah 58. But why is Jesus saying, I have come to do this? Why? Because the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. In other words, he had received his rest, and therefore he's doing this. So the Lord is saying, this is the fast that I'm talking about, right? For you to receive your rest, and you would do all of these things, right? You would help those that are bound. You would preach to the poor, right? You would bring, in other words, into your house. This is not really talking about just giving a sandwich to somebody that doesn't have food, and to someone that's homeless, bringing them in and giving them a bed. It's really, I mean, it obviously, there are things that you by the Spirit of God will do, and you have the abundance in order to be able to give and help those in need. But the point to everything that he's saying here is really about their seeking of God. That's Isaiah 58 is about, this is the proper way for you to seek me. And you seek me, right, by seeking, right, the rest that I have come to give you. How do we receive that rest, right? How do we get that rest? And that leads us to a very good point here while we're trying to wrap up here. Yeah. Look at verse number, just real quick here. Isaiah 16. Look at verse number 4. Isaiah 16:4. He said, but these things I have told you, that when the time comes you may remember that I told you of them. And these things I did not say to you at the beginning because I was with you. But now, verse number 5, he says, but now I go away to him who sent me. And again, he's talking about I finished the work on the cross and then I'm returning. That's how you know that he's talking prophetically here, because obviously he wasn't leaving yet, right? And he needed to die on the cross and then go, right? But he's saying, but now I go away to him who sent me, and none of you ask me, where are you going, right? Because what he wants to tell them is, I'm going to my Father because I came to die on the cross, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to die, and I'm going to finish the work, and I'm going to return to the glory that I once shared. And that glory that I have from the Father, in John, in the next chapter, he tells them, he said, I'm going to give it to you. That same glory that I have, that I'm returning to, that I had with the Father before time began, I'm going to give you that same glory. The one I shared with the Father that I'm returning to, I'm going to give you that same glory. I'm going to glorify you the same way. But he says, but you don't ask me where I'm going. Verse number 6, but because I have said these things, sorrow has filled your heart, right? That is an interesting thing, and I'll just say it quickly. He said, you're sad because I'm leaving, right? But even, honestly, even that is really almost, if you'll allow me this latitude a little bit, right, is a shadow of the glorified Jesus, right? Because Christ at this point is not whom he was going to make us like, right? He was going to make us like himself glorified. So he says, I know you're sad because you're used to having me here, sitting next to you, talking to you, helping you, right? You were able to go out and heal the sick and raise the dead because of my power that was with you, right? And now that I'm telling you that I'm leaving, now sorrow has filled your heart. He says, but you don't get it. I don't want you to hold on to me now. I don't want you to hold on to this, right? I want you to hold on to the one that I'm going to send and give you. Him, hold on to him, because that'll be me. I'm going to come and I'm going to take up residence on the inside of you, right? And I'm going to make you a new creation like me, right? And you will be as I am. Not hold on to my carnal being, right? At the time, sure, that might have seemed like a thing to them, right? To hold on to Jesus because he was with them and they don't want him to go. But that's why he tells them here, he says in verse number 7, he says, I tell you the truth. He says, it is to your advantage that I go away. That couldn't probably fit their mind. Like, I don't know how this could be better. Like, you're with us. We have not lacked money, food, nothing, right? We have power. Demons are subject unto us. Like, this is good. He's saying, what I'm going to give you is better, right? This is good. I can give you better, right? I don't want you to hold on to this. He says, to your advantage that I go away. Because if I don't go away, the helper will not come to you. But if I depart, I'll send him to you. And verse number 8 says, and when he has come, he will convict. And then that's what he tells them, right? What we read before. He will convict the world of sin, of righteousness, and of judgment. In other words, when the Spirit of God comes, he will show and speak to the world, you must believe in Jesus, right? Because look at what he has done. That's what the church should sound like, right? That's what we should sound like. If we have the right words in our mouth, that's what our speaking should sound like. That's why he tells them, if we can just rush back to Isaiah 58, one last time, and we'll stay there. Verse number 13, Isaiah 58:13. And now, you'll be able to put this together. It's almost like if you would have heard this message and then last week's message, right? But it's fine. I think the order is not that important. But he says to them now, in light of everything that we just read, he said, if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, right? The Sabbath obviously being that rest. So he goes from speaking about fasting and now, boom, he goes right to the Sabbath, right? Because he's talking about the same thing. He says, if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, and he says again, from doing your pleasure. What were they taking pleasure in? They were taking pleasure in fasting, right? He says, if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, doing your pleasure on my holy day, and you call the Sabbath my rest by my Spirit, if you call that a delight, if you delight yourself in what I'm going to do, what I just read to you out of John, right, 16, right, that he would send his Spirit. If you would call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable, see, that which I find acceptable. In other words, what he's saying is, if you can find acceptable what I find acceptable, instead of you not knowing that that's not the acceptable day of the Lord. The acceptable day of the Lord was Christ coming, right, and his being crucified, right, but that was I think in Scripture it says the acceptable year of the Lord, but it's the same thing, right? Is this an acceptable day to me? Like, you're missing what is acceptable to me, right? So he says, if the holy day of the Lord, if you find it honorable, and shall honor him. You see how he's talking about the Sabbath, and then he says about honoring him. He's talking about Jesus, right? And shall honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words. He says, then you shall delight yourself in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride on the high hills of the earth and feed you with the heritage or the inheritance, right, of Jacob your father. All right, if you give me 2 seconds just to finish up here. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 31. Genesis chapter 1 and verse number 31. And we're going to go right into chapter 2, just like the first verse of that, because this is the end of 1, and then it goes into 2, but it's just one thought. He says, then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day, right? That was the sixth day. God created everything on the sixth day. And he was talking here about the Sabbath just a second ago, which is the seventh day, right? Chapter 2, verse 1, Genesis 2:1 says, thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished, right? Were finished. So he says on the seventh day, right? Verse 2 says, and on the seventh day, God ended his work, which he had done, not which we had done, which he had done. He ended the work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done, and then God blessed the seventh day, right? So you see the attention here. The attention here goes to what the Lord did, right? What the Lord did on the first 6 days, right? He worked and he labored, right? And then the seventh day, he said, now you rest. He labored for 6 days, and then he says, now you rest. The Sabbath, the reason why that was special, right, is because that was a symbol of it is finished, right? Because that's when you rest, when it's done. That's when he rested, when it was done, right? So when it was finished, when it was done, right? That's when God was pointing to him, saying, now that it's finished, now he's saying, now you can rest. Now you can rest. Quick before they notice, Exodus 16:4. Exodus 16:4. Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. So this was the Lord giving them bread and saying, you know what, you needed bread? I'm going to give you bread. Go out every day and gather bread. And he says, but I'm doing this to test them, to see if they'll to see if they'll walk in my law or not. And this says in verse number 5, and it shall be that on the sixth day they shall prepare and what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. Here's the punchline to this, right? The Lord was giving them bread from heaven and not allowing them to gather on the seventh day to test them to see if they will keep his commandment. But what was the command of God that he really wanted them to keep? It was really faith, right? It wasn't to see, oh, will they listen to me? Will I tell them 6 days, and on the seventh day that I told them don't gather, will they really not gather? That wasn't the test. That wasn't the test, right? Because they couldn't do it. There was nothing there to gather, right? It wasn't like God put it out there, right? And then they were going to go out to gather. I mean, they tried that. They did actually go out, and then there was nothing there. And the Lord said to them, like, you don't believe me, right? But what do you mean you don't believe me? No, why didn't he say you're disobedient? I told you not to go, and you went anyway. He said they don't believe me. Why? Because it was a shadow, again, right? What they were eating and gathering those 6 days was an example of Jesus's work, right? His work, those 6 days. The seventh day, he said, I'm going to give you twice as much. In other words, my provision, what I have provided for you the sixth day, will be enough for you where you can rest, right? What Jesus has done is enough for us. We don't need to circumcise ourselves. We don't need to be water baptized to get something from God, right? We don't need to fast, right, in order to have a breakthrough with Jesus, right? You don't need to do any of that stuff. You just have to know what they mean. And you can get that from just looking at him, right? So he says, behold me, right? If you can understand, right, that all that he was, again, testing them, what? To see if they will look at a shadow and understand what it means. The mistake they made was I just turned it off, right, was the exact same mistake the 5,000 made. They were fed, didn't see the sign. These people were fed, didn't see the sign, right? Same sign, right? Jesus. With one of them, he was standing right in front of them, and they missed it. The other one, he wasn't right in front of them, he was ahead of them, and they still missed it. So whether he's there or he ain't there, you still miss it, right? People say, oh, Jesus, if I could have just been in there in those times, I would have soaked it all in, just you talking. No, if you miss it now, you'll miss it then, right? Him standing there wouldn't have made any difference. You're hearing the voice of God is being heard regardless. If people miss it now, they would miss it if he was standing right there in front of them, right? All of them missed it. All 5,000. He fed them all, and every single one of them missed it. It wasn't like, oh, maybe it was just 50%. No, they all missed it, right? And they all came back because they didn't understand, right? Thank God. Thank God that the Lord is so good. When you go back, he's still explaining stuff to you.
We hope you enjoyed this message from Reformed Church. If you have, please share this with someone else and help us get this uncommon truth out to the world. If you'd like to support this good news, you can do so at reformedchurch.com/give. Also on our website, you can take advantage of our free messages, articles, and even full discipleship courses. Start reforming your mind now at reformedchurch.com.